May 24, 1864, North Anna River, Virginia. The air above the Confederate earthworks is ripe with sulfur and river mud and the sweet rot of men who died 3 days ago and haven't been buried. It is barely morning, and the heat is already something alive, something pressing down on every blue-coated soldier lying flat against his entrenched position, bayonet fixed, listening. The North Anna River moves quietly, 20 yards behind them, an indifferent witness to what is about to happen. The pontoon bridges creak in the current. The telegraph wire running back toward Fredericksburg goes silent at intervals, then clicks again, desperate and rapid, carrying words that no one on this front line will ever read. Somewhere in the trees to the south, somewhere inside that elegant and terrible V-shaped fortification of Confederate earth and sharpened stakes and emplaced artillery, Robert Edward Lee is waiting. He is also dying. Not from a bullet, not from artillery, from his own body, which has chosen this exact moment, the most critical moment of his career, to betray him. Fever, weakness, a cramping agony in his bowels that historians will debate for a century and a half, whether it was dysentery or the first true assault of the heart disease that will kill him 6 years later. It doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is this: the greatest tactical mind the Confederacy ever produced, the man who beat McClellan at the 7 Days, who beat Pope at Second Bull Run, who beat Burnside at Fredericksburg, who beat Hooker at Chancellorsville, who came within a bayonet's reach of destroying the Union Army at the Wilderness just 3 weeks ago, is lying in his tent on a cot, while the most important battle of his life unfolds without him. And across the North Anna River, sitting at his headquarters at Mount Carmel Church with an unlit cigar wedged between his teeth and a pencil moving slowly across a map, Ulysses Simpson Grant is watching him lose it. To understand what North Anna really was, to understand why this battle matters more than almost anyone teaches in school, you have to go back, not years, weeks. You have to go back to a forest in Virginia that no longer exists the way it existed then. A tangle of second-growth oak and pine so dense that artillery was nearly useless, and men fought by sound instead of sight. You have to go back to the wilderness. It is early May 1864, and the Army of the Potomac has had 4 commanders in 4 years and lost every meaningful engagement it has fought against Robert E. Lee. George McClellan, who built the finest army on the continent and then refused to use it, who had 87,000 men and the tactical advantage at Antietam, and still couldn't close the hammer. Ambrose Burnside, who sent 12,000 men straight into the Confederate guns at Fredericksburg in December 1862, wave after parade ground wave up that killing slope, until the frozen ground in front of the stone wall was carpeted 3 feet deep in Union dead. Joseph Hooker, who had 130,000 men and every advantage of position and surprise at Chancellorsville, and then sat in his headquarters at the Chancellor House and stopped thinking while Lee and Stonewall Jackson executed their audacious flanking maneuver through 12 miles of tangled wilderness road. And George Meade, who won Gettysburg in July 1863 and then watched Lee limp back across the Potomac and never seriously pursued him. Each time, the pattern was the same. Lee strikes, Lee maneuvers, the Union commander hesitates, retreats, or simply stops. And the war drags on. Lincoln understands the problem. He states it plainly. The Army of the Potomac keeps winning battles and then retreating as though it has lost them. What he needs is a general who fights the way the North's industrial capacity demands, who treats the war as a problem of arithmetic, who understands that the Confederacy cannot replace its losses and the Union can. What he needs is a general who will not break. He finds him in the West. Ulysses Grant, the man who took Forts Henry and Donelson in February 1862, who clawed back from the edge of annihilation at Shiloh, who spent 18 months engineering the capture of Vicksburg, splitting the Confederacy down the Mississippi River, and opening the entire Western theater. Grant is not a genius in the sense that Lee is a genius. He doesn't have Lee's instinct for the inspired move, the audacious gamble, the sweep around an open flank that leaves an enemy gasping. What Grant has is something less celebrated and far more dangerous. He has the capacity to absorb punishment and keep walking forward. He has the constitution of a man who has already failed at everything and survived it, and who therefore has no remaining fear of failure. In March 1864, Lincoln gives Grant command of all Union armies. He moves east. He establishes his headquarters with the Army of the Potomac under Meade. And on May 4, 1864, the Army of the Potomac crosses the Rapidan River at Germanna Ford with 118,000 men, the largest Union force ever assembled in the Eastern Theater. Lee meets them in the wilderness. 2 days of combat in tangled, burning forest. The woods catch fire from the artillery and the musket flashes, and wounded men who cannot move are burned alive, and the screaming carries through the smoke until it doesn't anymore. Grant's army loses roughly 17,500 casualties in 48 hours. The fighting is close, brutal, and inconclusive. Men firing at muzzle flashes 20 yards away. Brigades losing their cohesion in the underbrush. Generals making decisions based on sound alone. The smell of burning hair and charred wool and gunpowder hangs over every acre of the wilderness like a verdict. And then Grant does the thing that changes the war. He moves south. Every Union general who fought Lee in the wilderness or anywhere near it has done the same thing when it ended badly. Turned around, marched back north, retreated to regroup, to resupply, to write their reports. When the soldiers of the Army of the Potomac begin marching after the wilderness, they are certain they are doing it again. They have the particular dead exhaustion of men who know they are beaten. And then they reach a crossroads, and Grant turns them south, toward Richmond, toward Lee. The men begin to cheer. That march south changes something in the psychological landscape of the war. It tells every Confederate soldier watching from behind earthworks and tree lines that something fundamental has shifted in the Federal command. This new general, this rumpled man with the dead cigar and the plain uniform and the silence that some people read as stupidity and others read as something harder, does not retreat. He advances, always south, always toward Lee. The wilderness becomes Spotsylvania Courthouse, and Spotsylvania is, if anything worse, 12 days of combat centered on a salient in the Confederate line that the soldiers will call the Mule Shoe and then rename after May 12th in more honest terms. May 12th, the Bloody Angle. 18,000 Union troops assault the Confederate salient at dawn in fog and driving rain, and what follows is 18 hours of the most savage hand-to-hand fighting in the entire Civil War. Men stabbing with bayonets through the log breastworks. Men reaching over the top of earthworks to bash each other with rifle butts. A white oak tree 2 feet thick is cut down entirely by musketry, just shot through until it falls. The fighting is so sustained and so close that the mud on the Confederate side of the breastworks turns red, and the men are standing in it ankle deep, and the screaming never stops for half a day. Union casualties at Spotsylvania run to 18,000 over the full 12 days. Confederate losses, harder to tabulate but estimated near 12,000. Among the dead is one of the most feared men in the Confederacy. The men call him the Iron General, call him Allegheny Johnson, watch as his entire division surrenders at the Bloody Angle, 24 guns and 4,000 men taken in a single morning, and Grant moves south. He sends a telegram to Washington that will be read and reread for the rest of the war. I propose to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. It is not a boast. It is a statement of arithmetic. Grant understands that Lee cannot replace his casualties. The Confederacy in the spring of 1864 is a machine running down, its supply lines fraying, its manpower pools emptying, its railroad network in the Western Theater already shattered by Sherman's relentless advance toward Atlanta. Every man Lee loses at the Wilderness or Spotsylvania is a man the Confederacy cannot give back, and Grant will keep feeding men into the machine until the machine breaks. Lee understands this. It is in his correspondence from this period, the letters to Jefferson Davis and to his corps commanders, the dispatches that survive in the archives. He is not a stupid man. He knows what Grant's strategy means in the long arithmetic of the war. He cannot win a war of attrition. The North has 22 million people. The Confederacy has 9 million. Nearly a third of them enslaved and not fighting for the Confederate cause, regardless of what the lost cause mythology will later claim. The math is simple, and it is damning. Lee cannot outlast Grant. What Lee can do is outthink him. And so, at the North Anna River, Robert E. Lee sets the finest trap of the entire Civil War. By May 23rd, Grant's army has pushed south for 3 straight weeks without a day's rest. The soldiers of the Army of the Potomac are carrying 40-round cartridge boxes, 60-pound packs, 9-pound Springfield rifled muskets, marching in Virginia heat that reaches 90 degrees by midday, their feet wrapped in disintegrating leather, and their faces caked with red clay dust. They have been moving and fighting and moving again since the Rapidan crossing, and exhaustion has settled into their bones like iron. They cross the North Anna River expecting to find Lee retreating again, expecting the rearguard action, the skirmish line buying time for Confederate infantry already heading for the next defensible line. What they find instead is a geometric masterpiece built in earth and timber. Working through the night of May 22nd, Confederate engineers have constructed an inverted V-shaped fortification along a 5-mile front. The apex of the V is positioned at Ox Ford, a critical crossing point at the center of the Confederate line. The left wing of the V anchors on Little River to the west. The right wing anchors on the marshes near Hanover Junction to the east. It is what the soldiers call a hog's snout, this V-shape pressed into the Union advance like a wedge. And it is brilliant in the way that only things which are about to kill a great many people can be brilliant. The mathematics of the V are lethal. When Grant's army crosses the North Anna and moves inland, it must divide. There is no alternative. The geography of the river, the position of the crossings, the angle of the fortification all conspire to split the Union advance into 3 separate columns. Warren's 5th Corps crosses at Jericho Mills to the west. Hancock's 2nd Corps crosses at Chesterfield Bridge to the east. Burnside's 9th Corps tries to cross at Ox Ford in the center, exactly where the apex of the V sits, exactly where the Confederate guns are strongest, and finds it impossible. The result is a Union army cut into 3 pieces that cannot see each other, cannot support each other, cannot reinforce each other, separated by the very river they crossed to find Lee. And Lee is positioned on the interior lines of the V, which means his army can move from one isolated Union segment to another in a fraction of the time it would take those segments to support each other. He can mass against Warren's corps while Hancock watches helplessly from across the river. He can then turn and mass against Hancock while Warren is powerless to intervene. He can destroy Grant's army in detail, piece by piece, the way a butcher breaks down a carcass. This is the moment. This is Lee's great chance, the trap he has spent weeks maneuvering to set. On May 23rd, the jaws begin to close. Brigadier General James H. Wilson's Union cavalry crosses first at dawn, skirmishing with Confederate pickets along the riverbank, the crack of cavalry carbines echoing across the water in the gray morning light. By midday, the 9th Corps pontoon train arrives at Jericho Mills, and General Gouverneur Warren begins feeding his infantry across, regiment by regiment, artillery limbers clattering across the planking, the North Anna running brown and rapid beneath the bridge. Half his corps is across, and half is still on the north bank when A.P. Hill spots the opportunity. A.P. Hill, one of the finest attacking generals in the Confederate Army, a man who turned the tide at Antietam by arriving with his light division at the exact moment McClellan's flank was breaking, sees Warren's men strung out in column along the crossing and sends his Georgians forward at the double quick. The rebel yell rises from the tree line, that wavering, high-pitched scream that Union veterans will describe for the rest of their lives as something that got inside your chest and stayed there. Confederate infantry crashes into Warren's forward brigades, musket fire erupting in walls of white smoke along the tree line, 58 caliber Minié balls shredding through the underbrush and through men with the same indifferent velocity. Union casualties at Jericho Mills reach 377 before Warren's men stabilize their position, and Warren orders his artillery unlimbered and his men into earthworks. Hill's assault is fierce, it is determined, but it is repulsed. Further east, at Chesterfield Bridge, a single Confederate regiment, Colonel John W. Hennigan's South Carolinians, barely 1,000 men, hold the crossing against Winfield Scott Hancock's entire 2nd Corps, a formation of 28,000 veterans who have broken Confederate lines at Gettysburg and Spotsylvania and a dozen engagements in between. Hennigan's men use every advantage of prepared position, firing from behind earthworks, forcing Hancock's advance units to pay in blood for every yard of ground, slowing the Union momentum through the hours that Lee needs to coordinate his main assault. For a few hours on May 23rd, it seems as though Lee's trap is actually springing, and then Grant looks at a map. Horace Porter, one of Grant's staff officers, will record this moment in his memoirs, and the picture he draws is unforgettable. Grant is sitting at his headquarters at Mount Carmel Church, a plain wooden building that smells of old timber and the pipe smoke of a dozen officers. His map is spread across a rough table. His unlit cigar has been chewed down to a stub. His officers are white-faced, their voices carrying the particular quality of men who are trying to report catastrophic news in a controlled manner. The army is divided. They are trapped. Lee is preparing to attack. The situation calls for retreat. Every military calculation in the book calls for retreat. Grant does not retreat. He sits there in the candlelight with his pencil moving across the map, and he says, quietly, in the flat Ohio accent that his officers have come to understand means absolute finality, that they will halt their advance, entrench their positions, and wait. If Lee attacks, they will fight from prepared positions. That is all. No drama, no speech, no theatrical declaration of defiance. Just a man with a pencil and a map deciding that he is not going to be psychologically broken by a V-shaped line in the Virginia dirt. Think for a moment about what this refusal costs him emotionally. Every general he has watched command this army has done the logical thing in a crisis. McClellan, faced with any threat, any uncertainty, any intelligence report suggesting a larger Confederate force than he believed, stopped and called for reinforcements he didn't need and retreated to positions he didn't have to abandon. Burnside, stunned by the disaster at Fredericksburg, could not command for days. Hooker, when Jackson's flank attack hit his right wing at Chancellorsville and the 11th Corps broke and ran, sat in the Chancellor House and essentially waited for the battle to end without him. These are not cowards. These are men responding rationally to situations that contain real danger and genuine fear. The Army of the Potomac is divided into 3 isolated pieces, and Robert E. Lee is about to attack them. The fear in those headquarters is real. The danger is real. Grant just doesn't let fear make his decisions. He orders his commanders to dig. Through May 23rd and May 24th, the Army of the Potomac's 3 isolated wings create some of the strongest field fortifications seen in this campaign. Headlogs and abatis and artillery emplacements and rifle pits and traverses to deflect enfilading fire. Soldiers dig with bayonets and tin cups and their bare hands when the entrenching tools run out. They dig knowing they are inside a trap. They dig with the particular desperation of men who have been told by their general that they are staying, that there will be no retreat, that the ground under their feet is the ground they will hold. The mood in the trenches is tense and close and frightened, but it is also something else, something the soldiers of the Army of the Potomac have not fully felt before. It is the mood of men who believe their general knows what he is doing. Across the North Anna, in a white canvas tent that the May heat turns into an oven, Robert E. Lee is trying to command an army he cannot see. The fever has been building for days. It is now serious enough that Lee cannot ride. He cannot walk the lines the way he has walked every line from the 7 days to the Wilderness, cannot feel the ground under his boots and see where the artillery is best positioned and read the faces of his regimental commanders and know by instinct where the line will hold and where it might break. All of that, everything that makes Lee Lee, requires his physical presence. It requires his body, and his body has betrayed him. He summons A.P. Hill to his tent. He summons Richard Anderson, who now commands Longstreet's 1st Corps after Longstreet was badly wounded in the Wilderness, shot by his own men in a haunting echo of the wound that killed Stonewall Jackson a year before at Chancellorsville. He summons Richard Ewell, who commands the 2nd Corps with a deliberate cautiousness that Lee finds frustrating even in good health. He tells them what he needs. He needs a coordinated attack against Grant's isolated wings, massive and simultaneous, the kind of coordinated hammer blow that will fall on Warren and Hancock before they can reinforce each other. He needs it now, before Grant has time to entrench too deeply, before the Union numerical advantage in men and artillery can be fully deployed behind prepared positions. The words he speaks from his cot will become one of the most quoted regrets in Civil War history. The accounts from Confederate officers describe Lee raising himself partially from his blankets, his face pale and sheened with sweat, his voice carrying a desperate urgency that those who knew him found terrible to witness. "We must strike them a blow. We cannot let them pass us. We must not let them pass us." They cannot execute his vision. Hill is himself sick, not as gravely as Lee, but weakened enough that his coordination suffers, his communication with adjacent units sluggish, where it should be instant. Anderson is new to Corps command and cautious about overstepping. Ewell's men are exhausted from weeks of sustained fighting that has ground down every Confederate unit to a fraction of its paper strength. The Confederacy's supply situation, already critical, is deteriorating further. With every day Grant keeps pushing south, cutting rail lines, destroying depots, stretching the logistics of an army that was already stretched to breaking. Confederate soldiers at the North Anna are fighting on a diet of parched corn and whatever they can forage from farms that have been picked clean by armies passing back and forth for 3 years. Some are literally barefoot, their last pair of shoes worn out on the roads from Spotsylvania. What happens instead of Lee's hammer blow is a series of disconnected local engagements that achieve nothing decisive. At Ox Ford on May 24th, Brigadier General John B. Gordon leads the most coordinated Confederate attack of the battle, driving hard at the apex of the V, where Hancock's 2nd Corps is entrenched. Gordon's men are among the finest in the Confederate Army, survivors of 100 engagements, men who have followed Gordon through fire at Sharpsburg and the Wilderness, and who would follow him into hell itself. They go forward with the rebel yell tearing from their throats and Confederate battle flags snapping in the wind above them, and they pay 500 casualties against entrenched Union infantry, backed by artillery firing canister at point-blank range, and they fail. The Union earthworks hold. The coordinated assault that Lee envisioned, the simultaneous pressure that would have forced Grant's divided wings to fight on multiple fronts without mutual support, never materializes. By May 25th, the greatest opportunity Robert E. Lee will ever have to destroy Ulysses. Grant is gone. Lee knows it. He lies in his tent and listens to the sounds of the fighting, the distant crackle of musketry, the deeper boom of artillery, the silence that falls and stretches and does not resolve into the sound of a pursuit, of a broken Union army fleeing back across the North Anna. The silence tells him everything. His aide, Charles Marshall, will describe Lee's state in these hours as the lowest the general ever appeared. A man who understood precisely what had been in his hands and precisely why he had been unable to close his fingers around it. Grant, meanwhile, is planning his exit. While the Confederate assault sputters and fails, while Lee's subordinates manage disconnected skirmishes instead of the coordinated destruction Lee needed, Grant is already looking at the map below the North Anna River. He is looking at the Pamunkey River, at Cold Harbor, at the distance between his present position and the Richmond defenses. He is already calculating the next move, the next flanking march, the next forced turn that will make Lee abandon whatever position he holds and race south to cover the capital. On May 25th, Grant sends a telegram to General Halleck in Washington. It is a remarkable document. "I have Lee's army where I want it," he writes. "The enemy are brought to bay." Standing in the trap that Lee set for him, divided from his own corps, surrounded by Confederate entrenchments, his army having just survived the most dangerous tactical position of the entire overland campaign, Ulysses Grant tells Washington that he has Lee exactly where he wants him. He is not delusional. He is stating a strategic truth that Lee, lying in his tent, already understands. Grant cannot be psychologically broken, and an opponent who cannot be broken cannot be beaten by psychology. The withdrawal begins before Lee fully realizes what is happening. Grant pulls his 3 isolated wings back behind the North Anna, uses his cavalry screen and a thinned rear guard to maintain the impression that the Union Army is still in position. And by May 26th, the main body of the Army of the Potomac is crossing the Pamunkey River at Hanovertown, sliding southeast again, angling around Lee's right flank, moving closer to Richmond. Lee had to abandon his perfect V-shaped fortress and race to keep himself between Grant and the Confederate capital. He He had sprung his finest trap, and his prey had simply walked through it and kept going. The Lost Cause tradition, that vast and ultimately dishonest project of reframing Confederate defeat as noble tragedy, will tell you that Grant won the Overland Campaign because he was the butcher, because he spent Union lives with a callousness that Lee would never countenance, because numerical superiority made tactical genius irrelevant. That is the lie. The truth is that Grant was not reckless with lives, not by the standards of mid-19th century warfare, and not by any honest comparison with Lee's own offensive operations in 1862 and 1863 that produced staggering Confederate casualties for strategic gains that ultimately proved temporary. The truth is that Grant's approach to the North Anna situation was not brute force. It was psychological steadiness deployed as a weapon. When Lee set his finest trap, Grant did not panic. He entrenched, he waited, he gathered intelligence, he calculated. And when he understood that Lee's illness had crippled the Confederate command structure, he withdrew on his own terms and moved south before the Confederate assault could be properly organized. The casualty ledger for the 5 days of the North Anna engagement is stark in its relative modesty. Union losses run to approximately 2,000 men, Confederate losses to approximately 2,000 men, with 304 Confederate killed confirmed in the records. These are numbers that seem almost reasonable in the context of a campaign that produced 17,000 casualties in the wilderness and 18,000 at Spotsylvania. North Anna is not remembered as a bloodbath because it was not won. It is not remembered at all, really, by most people who think they know the Civil War. It exists in the gap between Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor, a battle that ended without a clear winner, and therefore without a clear place in the popular memory of the war. But something happened at North Anna that did not happen at Gettysburg or Antietam or any of the battles that filled the history books and the monument rosters. Something happened in the minds of the two commanders that would shape everything that followed. Lee looked across the North Anna River at a Union army that he had perfectly positioned for destruction, and he watched it refuse to be destroyed. And in that refusal, in that absolute steadiness under conditions designed to produce panic, Lee saw the thing he had never seen in a Union commander before. He saw a man whose inner core would not shatter. Robert E. Lee has been breaking Union generals since 1862. He broke them with audacity at Second Bull Run, with psychological pressure at Fredericksburg, with brilliant misdirection at Chancellorsville. He broke them by being smarter, faster, more intuitive, more willing to take the calculated risk. But Grant does not fight on those terms. Grant fights on terms that Lee cannot counter, because the terms are simply this: I will keep coming forward. I will not retreat. I will absorb what you give me, and I will keep moving south. The pressure of that approach, sustained without relief over weeks and months, is something Lee has no answer for. A Union officer serving on Grant's staff writes of this period. I saw Grant riding along the entrenchments during the battle, and his calmness was almost supernatural. While we were all terrified, convinced we were about to be destroyed, Grant was smoking a cigar and nodding at the fortifications like a man reviewing a completed work. The officer means it as a compliment, but the phrase that stays is almost supernatural. Because what Grant is doing at the North Anna is not tactical brilliance. It is not the kind of inspired move that Jackson made in the Shenandoah Valley or that Lee made at Chancellorsville. It is something that feels almost inhuman in a human being, the ability to sit inside a trap, fully understanding that it is a trap, and simply refuse to be frightened by it. That refusal, quiet and total and without theatrics, is the most powerful weapon in the Union arsenal. It is not the Springfield rifled muskets, or the 12-pound Napoleon smoothbores, or the telegraph network connecting Grant's headquarters to Washington, or the pontoon bridges that can throw a crossing across any Virginia river in hours, or the industrial capacity of Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Baltimore that can replace a rifle in 3 days and a soldier in 3 weeks. All of those things matter. All of those things are real advantages and honest reasons why the Union wins this war in the end. But what makes those advantages decisive in the spring of 1864, what converts numerical and industrial superiority into actual battlefield outcomes, is a general who will not stop using them. The machine only wins if it keeps running. Grant keeps it running. The summer of 1864 is still brutal. The Army of the Potomac reaches Cold Harbor in early June, and on June 3rd, Grant makes the one tactical decision he will express regret about for the rest of his life, ordering a frontal assault across open ground against heavily entrenched Confederate positions. 7,000 Union soldiers fall in less than an hour, some of them pinning notes with their names on the inside of their coats so their bodies can be identified. It is a disaster. Grant knows it within minutes of the assault beginning. He does not make the same mistake again, but even Cold Harbor does not break him. He pivots south across the James River, a crossing that Lee does not anticipate, a move that catches the entire Confederate command structure off guard, and he arrives at Petersburg, the railroad hub south of Richmond, before the city's defenses are fully manned. For a few days, in mid-June 1864, the siege of Petersburg and the fall of Richmond are his if he can coordinate his corps commanders quickly enough. He cannot, not quite, not this time. And the opportunity closes as Lee rushes reinforcements south. But the siege begins, and the siege is itself the end of the Confederacy, written in slow time. Lee's army cannot be resupplied indefinitely. It cannot be reinforced. Every Minié ball fired from a Confederate rifle at Petersburg is a Minié ball that Virginia's iron furnaces cannot replace. Every man who falls in the siege trenches is a man the Confederacy cannot give back. Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. The Army of Northern Virginia has been reduced from the force that set the North Anna trap to a skeletal remnant. Gaunt men in butternut rags with worn-out shoes and empty cartridge boxes, 28,000 of them surrounded by a Union force 4 times their size. Lee rides into the McLean house in his finest uniform, with his dress sword, a man who understands the theater of the moment and intends to meet defeat on his own terms. Grant comes in a private's coat splattered with Virginia mud, the man who effectively ended the Confederacy looking like a sergeant who got lost on the way to the front. They sit together for an hour. Grant gives generous terms. Officers keep their sidearms. Men keep their horses for the spring planting. There is no imprisonment, no trial, no humiliation beyond the fundamental fact of defeat itself. Lee, by some accounts, expresses something close to admiration for Grant's persistence in the months after the war, in the correspondence and conversations that survive from his years as president of Washington College. What the post-war record makes clear is that Lee respected Grant's determination in a way he had never quite respected any previous Union commander, acknowledged, in whatever circumspect language the former Confederate general could employ, that the pressure Grant had maintained from the Rapidan to Appomattox was something different from what had come before. North Anna is why. Not because of what happened there in terms of ground taken, or casualties inflicted, or strategic positions secured. None of that changed meaningfully in those 5 days on the river. What happened at North Anna is that Lee looked across his finest trap and found it empty. He had set the perfect position, found the perfect moment, had Grant's army divided and vulnerable and ready for destruction, and Grant had simply looked at the situation and decided not to be destroyed by it. Lee had been breaking Union generals with psychology for 3 years, with the constant, relentless assault on their confidence, their certainty, their willingness to press forward when the situation looked dangerous. He had turned caution into paralysis and paralysis into retreat, and retreat into defeat, over and over, on every field from the peninsula to the Rappahannock. Grant was immune. Not because Grant did not understand danger, not because Grant lacked imagination or could not see how bad his position was. He understood it exactly. He sat at Mount Carmel Church with his map and his stub of unlit cigar, and he understood that Robert E. Lee had him in a trap that should have destroyed an army, and then he chose, with full knowledge, not to be broken by it. He dug in, he waited, he gathered his intelligence. He understood that Lee was sick, that the Confederate command structure was fumbling, that the coordination Lee needed could not be achieved without Lee personally riding those lines. He bet that a man who couldn't ride his own lines could not spring his own trap. He was right. What makes North Anna the psychological turning point of the Civil War is not what Grant did. It is what he refused to do. He refused to panic. He refused to retreat. He refused to give Lee the one thing Lee needed most by the spring of 1864, a Union general who could be broken. The trap at the North Anna was the last time Lee held a genuinely decisive advantage over Grant. After North Anna, Lee fights brilliantly, but he fights defensively, reacting to Grant's movements, managing a shrinking perimeter, bleeding men he cannot replace against entrenchments he cannot abandon. The offensive capacity of the Army of Northern Virginia, the thing that made Lee the most feared commander in the war, the capacity that produced the 7 days and Second Bull Run and Chancellorsville, dies at the North Anna River on May 25, 1864, not because Lee was beaten in battle, but because he was beaten by a man who simply would not break. Ulysses Grant was not the most brilliant general of the Civil War. He was not its best tactician or its most inspiring field commander, or the man who best understood the deeper human calculus of the soldier's experience. There are arguments, strong ones, that in terms of pure military talent, Lee was his superior and Sherman was his equal, and even men like Thomas and Sheridan had tactical gifts that Grant lacked. What Grant had was something that no other commander on either side possessed in quite the same measure. He had the capacity, tested and forged in years of failure before the war, in bankruptcy and drinking, and the particular humiliation of a man who has stood at the bottom and found he can keep breathing, to be struck and not shatter, to be trapped and not run. To stand in the worst possible position on the worst possible day and look at the map and say, quietly, without drama, without heroics, without the speeches and the declarations and the theatrical gestures of a man performing courage for an audience. No, I am not moving. Come and find me if you want me. Lee found him at the North Anna River and set his finest trap, and the trap did not close, because the man inside it simply would not break. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses Grant 11 months later. The Confederacy, built on the institution of human slavery and the fantasy that 4 million human beings could be owned as property forever, ended at Appomattox on a gray April morning. The mathematics of the war, the mathematics that Lee had understood and feared from the beginning, had done their grinding work. But the mathematics only worked because there was a man willing to apply them without flinching. The numbers needed a general. The general needed an unbreakable center. And the unbreakable center, the thing that won the Civil War in the long bloody spring of 1864, stood at a rough table in Mount Carmel Church and refused to retreat from the most dangerous position the Army of the Potomac had ever occupied, not because he was not afraid, but because he had decided, somewhere in the long wreckage of his earlier life, that fear would not be the thing that made his decisions. That is what happened on the North Anna River. That is what the battle really was. Not a Union victory and not a Confederate victory and not the inconclusive tactical standoff that the casualty ledgers suggest. It was the moment Robert E. Lee discovered that the man across the river could not be psychologically destroyed, and the moment that discovery began to destroy him. The man who wouldn't break had found the man he was going to break, and the war had exactly 11 months left to run.